Hello everybody, welcome to the second edition of Hyper Annotations. We are in Venice in front of Ocean Space talking to Barbara Casavecchia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you tell us more about your career and how the Ocean Space fits in and what is your relation to it? Thank you.
It's an ongoing relation because I had the chance of applying to the first mentorship that developed in relation to the first ocean fellowship that happened in Venice here a few years ago by now, but the pandemic arrived and so many things happened online, but still with some of the fellows we really wanted to be in Venice together. So against all odds we decided we'd move to Venice and spend time together, which is ultimately, the reason for wanting to be in a group, thinking together, working together, developing projects. So one of the outcomes of that first gathering somehow was the intention to start a cycle of walks around the city, the lagoon, and so forth. The cycle is titled Venice as a Model for the Future, with a question mark. And I worked on it with Pietro Consolandi, who is an ocean fellow. And it really started when the city was completely empty and sort of devoid of tourists. And the condition of the city was so visible because in November 2019, the super high water, Acqua Alta, that reached almost 2 meters, above the sea level, had hit the city. So to see the city somehow so severely hit by the conditions of water rising, and then the city so severely hit by the condition of pandemic arriving and leaving no people behind, really made it clear how somehow the local community was almost invisible in that larger picture. So one starts questioning, what do you do as a cultural institution when all the cultural institutions are closed? What does it mean to be able to operate also in small numbers? What does it mean to kind of break that vertical model of the conference? What does it happen when you open conversations as opposed to that frontal, vertical, assertive? And that was the beginning of a collaboration with Ocean Space, which then became, for me, the very wonderful opportunity to study for 2 years and then make a proposal for an exhibition in 2023. So currently I am leading this research cycle, which is titled The Current 3, because it's the third time it happens. Others are already unfolding. Mine has pretty long title, but it says Mediterraneans, open quote, thus waves come in pairs, close, after Etel Adnan, because it's a beautiful line from a wonderful poem by Etel Adnan.
Exactly, yes.
And so in this idea that the Mediterraneans, because we insist on pluralizing the Mediterraneans, because there are multiple conditions and a shifting condition, and a super interesting, really case study if one wants to discuss climate change, for instance. It's not so well known, but the Mediterraneans are the place on the planet where climate is happening 20% faster than any other place around. And so what does it mean to deconstruct certain narratives and try and find around an articulation of accelerating climate different ways for describing that space critically? What does it mean to bring in pairs voices from different spots? What does it mean to listen to scientists who are coming from Algeria or climatists that are coming from Greece? And what does it mean to listen to rights of nature being discussed by activists in southern Spain? And the possibility of bringing them all together has also been part of this pretty amazing journey, because, on one side there is the research that you really bring about in collaboration with other people. And then there are all the exchanges, and then you work with artists. Last year we commissioned to a local artist a walk around the lagoon on foot. He walked over 200 kilometers in a couple of weeks. And then we walked together with him to see what is to be learned by a practice which moves at that speed. What does it mean to walk and look carefully at things instead of speeding by with one of those super fast motor taxis? What does it mean to look into the ecology of a fossil dune? Move close to the bird species. Really, I come from a contemporary art background. I have a degree in art history. I've been teaching at the Art Academy for many years. I write also. I am a contributing editor to Freeze magazine, for instance. So to me, literally, the shift was real over the last 2 or 3 years. I really wanted to rethink through different paradigms. The whole idea of staying with the trouble. What does it mean to stay with the trouble somehow? Venice is a place where the fact that things are changing and very fast and very violently from a climate viewpoint, but not only. It's very evident. So what does it mean to adapt to that condition on a daily basis, and then understand that Venice is only one of the endless cities having this experience around the globe? What does it mean? Yesterday evening, there was this amazing evening of readings, performances, and which is titled Abaquad, which literally means the sun after the storm or the clearing, and it's pretty amazing that the weather reflected that, with an amazing performance by Rebecca Belmore on the steps of this church. So what does it mean to listen to voices that come from the Sami community, that come from Syria, that come from the Philippines, Sarawak? I see the Academy and my very lucky possibility of being part of it as literally a moment for studying together. I think I see the Academy not as a stronghold of positions that need to territorialize knowledge, but quite the opposite, as a space where people can come together and share ideas and listen to each other in ways which are different. So the possibility of doing this through art, through dialogues between science, which is a form of knowledge. Now everything is predictive somehow. Big data, artificial intelligence and everything, all the models are predictive. But what does it mean to bring together, predictive science and divination? Different forms of ways of thinking in the future, but coming from different knowledges and without establishing so clearly hierarchies of what is meant to be divided and marginalized. So, long story short, I'm studying, I think, and I hope that with the help of artists, this can also materialize in a way of sharing these ideas with the public, just coming and see art, because art also has this pretty magical power of bringing, like poetry, really, bringing also very complex ideas and researches and layered thinking, and just put it out there as an object of reflection, but also as a poetic instance. And this is why I really wanted to have a title coming from a poem.
That's super interesting, and especially the way you're talking about this engagement of local knowledges or new models of knowledges with more universal thinking about more universal problems or issues or matters at hand. So I want to talk about how this wide fields, like different areas, how they come together to bring it to that moment, to that you're saying, like the exhibition, the performances. You mentioned like for this commissioned artwork. I'm wondering how all these researchers come together to bring about a moment of conversation with the public or becoming like a moment in exhibition.
Thank you. For instance, to start from the example you're reporting, the walk around the lagoon, which was titled Lacuna, which is also an interesting title because Lacuna in Italian stands for a gap, something you can't really see, but also it's at the core of the word laguna, which is lagoon and so forth. I mean, Giorgio Andreotta Calò, who is the artist, he walked alone. And then, as I was saying, we walked together with him a month afterwards with a small group. And then we discussed about it. But then we also did a big presentation here at San Lorenzo with the public, for the public. We also reproposed a big conversation around that piece during the Anthropocene campus, which took place in Venice. Part of the things being developed go on the Ocean Archive, which is a website, and it's open and free for all. Ocean Uni, which is this platform which hosts conversations, sessions around given themes, and the semester is still unfolding, is a completely free platform. Anybody can enroll. So there is really the desire to make this accessible. Then, of course, there are always different speeds and depths within a research, but often, I mean, talking about local ecological knowledges, one of the subjects have been food and foraging, and what is to be learned by people who know exactly what to forage and where, and what does it mean when you walk in a salt marsh with them, and then you bring everything back here and you share it, or when you try and build networks of local ecological knowledges. I mean, Venice is a place where there are wonderful universities. I mean, we often work in collaboration with Ca' Foscari and Niche, which is this center for humanities, climate change, and so forth, supported by the New Institute. So you often have scholars, and I don't know, we walked on a salt marsh with a local activist who's been working on salt marshes for 50 years. What do you learn in those contexts? And so I think, I don't know if this entirely answers your question, but the intention is really to find ways to articulate a discourse around climate and change, and us being in a process of change and adaptation, which is not only about catastrophe, and it is also about a condition of emergency, but it's also about a condition of thinking together, looking for solutions, and possibly learn from those who have been living in certain conditions. I mean, Mediterraneans are now one of the areas where aridity is rising at incredibly fast speed. So what do we learn from those who have been living in arid lands, in arid conditions for centuries? And why do we need to change the narrations around what do we intend by desert and desertification and regreening? Why are those ideas essentially colonial? Which models do they bring about? And why, I mean, words need to change in order for ideas to change, and so forth. So I think this is part of what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I was especially the way that you are talking about, like bringing all this together, like, and looking for this emergent knowledges, emergent areas, emergent wordings that can happen in between all this. And you mentioned institutions, working with institutions in the cities. I was wondering now, because we are meeting in the context of Venice Biennale, how the events that happen in the city that brings in many events and many big, more universal global events. Are you somehow in conversation with that too? Could it be like, I don't know, a sideshow, or even like some part, like as you mentioned, Sami Pavilion? Or I wondered how it's this conversation with the things that temporary sometimes comes in the city happens. I know that's a big question, or maybe I don't know.
No, it is. It is a big question, and I think, a small example is exhibitions here usually open before the Biennale is open. One wants to have also a moment for being open, simply because the local community is here. And then, of course, maybe other people come to the city, and then you want to organize something special on that occasion. But the collaboration for, ISMAR, which is the Center for Oceanographic and Scientific Research, which is one of the most interesting places where also the waves, the tides, high waters have been studied since, the 60s, really. So it's always, weaving multiple collaborations, because the space here is open seasonally, because there is no climate control.
Oh.
So you can open in late March. It's still a bit chilly, but you can. And usually by the end of October, it's really too cold. So usually, exhibitions are kept open for a long time so that things overlap. Presentations, readings, conversations, and so forth. I think one always tries and build alliances. But also the fact of being here constantly allows for a different speed, I think. It's also the commitment of being in a place and wanting to be in a place not only for the glitzy occasion, but throughout a given amount of time. Now the walks are in their third cycle. What does it mean to also learn over years and have the possibility of layering information and then just not only touch and go? So Venice is a complex ecology of institutions, local institutions. The Biennale is amazing. The Biennale also is changing, because now also the Biennale, I think, is trying to restructure itself as a research center. New funds will come into the archive, the reorganization of all their materials. So I think that this idea of the city of Venice as being a possible model for intellectual work, artwork, scholarly work, but also I think it's one of the sort of good reasons for being here. But I think it also depends on the project, because sometimes one falls in love with a project and you really want to support it, or you find friendships and kinships along the way, as was the case for the Abaquad. So
thank you. That was super interesting. And maybe as a last question for now, I wanted to ask you about this year's exhibition. If you find something interesting that you had a connection with, or generally you had collaboration with, you can elaborate on that, or the next year exhibition that you have. I know that it's still far away, but it would be nice to hear some details if they are building up.
As to next year exhibition, it's just a bit too early. I had site visits over the last few days, and I would love to give the artist a bit of time to articulate. But to me, the core of what I'd like, to imagine as a full program, because I think of the exhibition, the education program, and the walks, and everything sort of coming together as a sort of really organic creature expanding, but the idea, which is in the title, of things coming in pairs, really wants to reflect a modality which is removed from the idea of the solo show, or that articulating, yes, a model where one and one only is asked to represent everything. I'd rather look for horizontal, shared, collaborative experiences. As for these two exhibitions, which are by Dineo Sische-Bobape and Gian Policarpo, they're both curated by Chus Martinez as part of also a long cycle, which is now coming to a conclusion. It's titled The Soul Expanding Ocean. So I think that they worked independently, and also the two artworks are extremely different, as you'll see. But on one side, Gianna brings attention to the ciguatera, which is this, well, disease, intoxication, something in the food chain that has repercussions and intertwinings in multiple levels, which is an amazingly interesting metaphor of how we are all interconnected. And also how, something which is harmful, but also part of an entire cycle, needs to be reconsidered. Intoxication, pollution, but also, of course, we share time and space and bodies with bacteria, and what does it mean to rethink also humans in relation to these multiple presences? While Dineo, she works with a different type of material, but it's also research into dreams and expressing a connection with the sea, and what does it mean to be below and above water, and how to use touch and proximity, even in a very literal way, because you see it in the images of things being either coming from or being, put into the water. But I think it's also the freedom of wanting to address such a huge concept as ocean and try and respond differently, also from different cultural perspective, but together, because somehow the two exhibitions are in dialogue, and the two artists really make good friends after that experience, which was also super important. So I think it's all about breaking certain molds, I would say, and also if one rethinks as waters as being, the vast, there are more waters than land on the planet. So to unlearn a terrestrial-only perspective, I think it's important to also move into other directions.
I really want to, as a personal curiosity now, ask about academy too, and how that works. And you have been or gonna be a mentor again? I don't know if this year.
No, I was a mentor for the first cycle of the fellowship. Last year there were other two mentors for a different set of fellows, and again this year there are other two mentors for a different group of fellows. So each time the fellowship is one of the many tentacles of the academy, and each time, because of the group of people being brought together and their researches and the interests of the mentors, it might head in different directions. For example, for my case, I'm still working for this semester of Ocean Uni with some of the fellows from the first round of the fellowship and some from the second round of the fellowship, because of our shared interests. And I'm sure, it will happen with others in different ways. But yes, usually the fellows, they're a bit younger, and there's a lot to be learned by intergenerational exchange, I think. So it's also an opportunity of listening and listening somehow, and sort of using experience, but also, I am each time humbled by the intelligence and ability to study and understand of younger generations. And so to me, this experience, it's mostly about learning, as I was saying before. So also to move out of those boxes. Contemporary art, sometimes it's a bit stiffening in its own ways of operating and sort of presenting and introducing subjects and disciplines and hyper specialized and kind of often dried out language and repetitive language also, or a language of exclusion, I find often. So I don't know, there's many elements at play, but TBA 21 Academy is really a large creature. So while my cycle is unfolding, others on the Pacific and the Caribbean are already in place. Exhibitions are being produced and gatherings and collaborations. So, and then of course, I mean, today he's not here, Marcus Reimann, who is the director of the Academy. There are conservation projects, there are many things at play, and so I don't know if I did a good job in describing it, but I hope, I mean, at least the spirit behind it is clear.
Thank you so much. Actually, that was too inspiring and interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you for
My
joining
pleasure.
us.
Thank you.